Good morning, boys and girls. I shared my screen to set up a focus question. What's the significance of the War of 1812? We'll also spend the first minute or two just kind of giving you an update on the election. We still don't have a president, so we'll do that soon. I'll keep you posted with that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So you guys copy down the focus question, copy down what's in red, and I'll be with everyone in a minute.
By the way, Mr. Panio, the other earlier when I came into the Google Meet, that was an accident. I confused with the tomorrow's schedule with today.
Okay. Yes, two things. Yes, you copy what's in red, as per usual. And yeah, that's no problem, Josh, no problem at all. All right, so let's get started. First, let's give you an update on the election. As of right now, we do not know who the president for the next 4 years will be. This is not much of a surprise, though usually 80% of the elections you know at this point. In 2016, you knew. In 2012, we knew. In 2008, we knew. Right now, Biden is slightly ahead. I would say he's like 60% to win. How do the appeals work? That is a great question, Anicia. I don't really have an answer to at this point because I don't know exactly what the appeal is just yet. I still need to see more information to come out to give a better answer on that. But I don't think we're going to have a knowledge of who the presidential election winner officially will be for at least a couple of days. Can Trump still win? Very much so. Can Biden still win? Very much so. It's really too early for me to tell. Basically, early on last night, Trump won some early states like Florida. And that was a huge state because that gave him an opportunity to win. If Biden had won Florida, this election would be over. But Trump won Florida, then he won Ohio, so it gave him a chance. Then Biden took a lead in the state of Arizona, which was a little bit of a surprise. So it's looking right now that Biden has Arizona, but that's not fully for that. If Biden won Florida, that would have been, yeah, most likely if Biden won Florida, he would have definitely been president. So Winderly and Dean, you guys got to make sure that if you are, have political views like, Florida doing bad, listen, Florida voted the way they voted and they have their view and that's fine. That's not them doing good or bad. That's, personal opinion. Just we have to take it for what it is. They voted that particular way. Josh, Biden did not win most of the Midwest. Most of the Midwest is still up for grabs at this point. He is slightly leading in states like Michigan. He's slightly leading in states like Wisconsin, but Trump is ahead slightly in Pennsylvania. So it's really close. Let's see. Yeah, California and New York were easy wins for the Democrat Biden. California won pretty big. I know Biden won New York. That's not a surprise, though he didn't win as much as Clinton, it seems like. Can Fox News be sued for early claiming or getting any form of punishment? No, not really. It looks really bad for their very bad for their network, though. If Biden gets Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan, he wins. Kiara, that looks like a correct statement. He would win probably 270 to 268, which would make it, I think, the closest election in American history. All right. A law. If Biden won Texas, he would have won the election too, but it ended up being that Trump ended up winning by like 6 or 7 points. Yeah, Trump won Texas. So I'm going to write in the chat here. Here's the states to kind of look at. These are the most important ones right now: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Those are by far the most important. So keep an eye on those. Georgia and North Carolina are still in play for Biden, though Trump is looking like he will win those. If Trump does lose one of those, he will probably lose the election too, but I would say that's unlikely. The real crazy one is Nevada. That one's still in play as well, because Trump could then lose Michigan and Wisconsin, but then win Nevada and Pennsylvania, he wins. So you guys are literally living through history, and at this point, it's still going. Maheen, it's a great question. So we had the biggest voter turnout in American history. More people voted in this election than any other election. With COVID going on, many people voted early and via paper ballot. Okay, so what that means is they were able to send in their mail, and now it takes time, depending on the state, to tally up those votes. So it takes a long time. So the thought was, if there was less mail-in balloting, then Trump probably would have won. Yeah, and it is great to see how many people voted. You know, regardless of who wins, it's good to see a lot more voting than in 2016. So that is a good thing. Sure, again, Tiana, ask your Textbook Thursday question.
So there was this question asked about what might be a surprise that Marshall chose, like the judicial review.
Yep.
But I'm having trouble coming up with the answer, because he was a Federalist, so he believed in the strict Constitution and wanted one of the branches to have more power.
Right. Give me the page number again one more time. Was it 269? Was that the one? Question 2. All right. What might have been considered surprising about John Marshall's action in establishing judicial review? Okay. So your answer is on the right track. Let me tell you the page number at least, so I can give you a little bit more of an opportunity to help you out. All right. So you should be looking at 260. All right, so you should take a look at 260 to help get the answer. All right. All right, so what would be surprising is that John Marshall was under Thomas Jefferson's cabinet. He was the Secretary of State. So he would have argued that the judicial branch would have gotten more power. Therefore, that's not what the strict constructionist view would be. 2 is a very tough question. So if you do not get that one or don't write the correct answer, that's quite okay. But ultimately, it relates to Jefferson, how Jefferson and Marshall both believed in the strict constructionist view of the Constitution. And this is not a strict constructionist view. All right? So hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal. It's just going to show you that Jefferson at this time is kind of flip-flopping, him and his administration, on the views on their Constitution. All right. Any final election things before I move on to today's assignment? If I have information, I'll try and get it out to you guys, but I think you guys are able to see what's happening in the media. Again, if I had a prediction, 60% chance Biden wins, 40% Trump. That's not to say Trump's not going to win. It's just kind of where it is at this point. So any final questions, post them in the chat. Otherwise, we are moving on to today's lesson. All right. Now, last thing I'll say about the election, it probably won't be decided over the next few hours. Nothing really, this is normal stuff. No need to worry. And regardless, no matter who wins, I think, a couple of things. We did have great voter turnout, which is really fantastic, which is really awesome. I think that's going to bode well for our country. And I also think that regardless, I mean, this is really an important thing to understand. If you really want Trump to win, or if you really want Biden to win, just look at how close this election is. Half of this country, half of this class, or whatever it is, half of this country is, you know, believes one thing, half of the country believes others. So you really need to have an open mind and hear people and their opinions, because no matter if Trump or Biden wins, guys and girls, it's going to be so close. It's going to be this close. So half of the country believes one thing, half the country believes another, and it's just going to come down to a couple percentage points, so to speak. And I hope as you guys get older, you are open to hearing other opinions and people that you maybe don't fully agree with. You know, so not picking on certain people, but, you know, saying a state, how could they do that? How could they vote for this person? You know, how could Ohio vote for Trump? How could Arizona vote for Biden, right? Guys, have an open thought, have an open opinion. You know, just know, even as 8th graders and even as me is older than you guys, you don't have everything figured out. So you want to keep an open mind and listen to people's perspective, even if you don't agree. All right, and that's the best advice I can give on elections. It's not about necessarily who wins or loses sometimes, as opposed to making sure we see other people's points of view and then formulating your opinions from there. All right. All right, so let's go back to American history. Just a little war we got to talk about for today. Now, you'll notice in this class, there's certain wars: the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War. We spend very good amount of time, okay, on the wars. A couple days, sometimes weeks. All right, World War II is like 2-3 weeks. We spend a long time on that, right? And then there's wars like the War of 1812, where we spend one period. And the reason that is twofold. It's not as an important war in American history. It's not a very important war in the regions, so don't spend a lot of time on it. All you need to do is be what I call moderately familiar. Know a cause or two, know a highlight or two, know the effect, and that's it. All right, you don't really need to know the battles, the details. So we're going to spend our time now kind of going over what is the significance of the War of 1812. Now, James Madison's the president under the war when the War of 1812 happens. Okay, he's the 4th president of the United States. Okay, so let's look at how and why this war starts. Okay, and how it kind of goes into effect. So first off, we need to just remember, and I've said this a lot, Great Britain and France are fighting in a war. So Great Britain has its attention kind of elsewhere, but they're doing some things in the United States and around America that is upsetting us. So you guys remember the Embargo Act, okay? We did the Embargo Act under Thomas Jefferson. We put a ban on trade with Britain. Britain's going to put a sanction and an embargo on us as well. So we're going to have some trading problems with Britain, which isn't usually a big deal, doesn't always lead to war, but it's one of those major steps. The biggest thing, though, has to be the first thing you copied down, which was during westward expansion, during the Louisiana Purchase, when we started moving westward, we got into conflicts with Native Americans. One of the most famous battles is the Battle of Tippecanoe, right? You're going to learn about that in the WebQuest. And, you know, when William Henry Harrison, the general, inspects some of the Native Americans after the battle's over, he's like, those are British weapons. That's a British musket. That's British ammo. How in the world did they get this? Well, after a little research and after a little, probing, they figured out that the British were supplying weapons to the Native Americans. Okay, they didn't like how America was expanding, so they kind of sent out some weapons to basically stop us from taking over some of that land and helping the Native Americans out. This upset many American people. All right, as we were going out and to the rest of the world, we were trading, we were on our ships, we were on our boats, and Britain had huge control of the Atlantic Ocean, and their navy sometimes would practice this thing called impressment. All right, not like you're trying to impress someone. Okay, impressment is when you capture someone, basically kidnap them, and force them to work for you. It's a step right below slavery because impressment soldiers actually get paid, which is kind of weird, but they don't. And not soldiers, sailors. Impressment sailors actually get paid, but they're just now working for British companies. So it's like they're either kidnapped or they're jailed, or they're like, you're kidnapped and you can work and get paid. So obviously many people are like, okay, I guess I'll just work and get paid, which is kind of a weird thing. Even as a older person than you, I still don't fully understand how impressment works. So I'm not going to try and act like an expert on it. But I will say, ladies and gentlemen, that this was another cause of the War of 1812. Yeah, or you're taken against your will, but you end up getting paid, so you're not technically a slave, but they use your work to do other things. It's bizarre. Okay, it's obviously not something that really happens really anymore. The next thing is Britain was located in present-day Canada. Now, Canada is located to the north of our country. Hopefully you know that. If you don't, they're located north of our country, and Britain used to be owned by Canada. And now at this point in time, Britain, all right, is going to get a little bit nosy in some of American affairs because they're located so close to us. So we're starting to have some problems again with Great Britain. And it's going to eventually lead out into a little bit of a war and conflict, starting specifically in Canada, then going to eventually America. All right, so let's look at some highlights. You're really only copying down one because the actual highlights of the war aren't so important for the regions, but there's some like really interesting and important things that happen throughout this war, okay? And some of this you may remember from last year. So here are the highlights. Number one, the war is fought between Britain and America. Again, before you even ask, yes, there's the one thing in red. The other things you don't need to write down, but obviously please read. The war is fought between Britain and America. A lot of people wanted to go to war, especially if they were part of the Democratic Republican political party. I will say, however, ladies and gentlemen, many of the people that wanted to go to the war, they were called what's known as war hawks. Okay, they were like hawks. They wanted the war to happen. But there was a group of people in New England colonies, such as Massachusetts, Rhode Island, even a little bit of New York. Some of the people from the Federalist Party did not want to fight in the war because they relied on a good relationship with Great Britain. Which word? Impressment? Warhawk. Yes. Anytime you're a hawk, you're basically wanting something to really happen really bad. So a war hawk is someone that is trying to get people convinced to go to war. What's another good example? Another one I've heard is a deficit hawk. So if you owe a lot of money, you know, a deficit hawk is going to try and get you to pay back a lot of money. So yeah, maybe SpongeBob, I don't know. But that's a term that has come up a bunch. And specifically, there's a lot of people in government that were war hawks trying to get us to go to war with Britain. And eventually, we were convinced to. Right. When we declare war on Britain, we actually have some success early on. We're able to win some of the army battles in America, and then we win some of the naval battles as well. But something happens towards the middle of the war. Britain beats France in the Napoleonic Wars. So now what does Britain do? Britain turns its attention to the United States. They send a lot of their soldiers over, and actually they go right towards Washington, D.C., and they will actually burn down the White House, as you see here. This is one of the more embarrassing moments in American history because I believe James Madison and his wife literally ran out of the White House while it was being set on fire. Okay? Literally narrowly escaped being assassinated. And there's a famous story of Dolly Madison, the first lady, taking the original portrait of George Washington as she left, which is a kind of cool thing. But our White House burned down. So the White House that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison stayed in is not the one that Donald Trump's sitting in right now, okay, because it was burned down. It had to be rebuilt. All right. The next thing is the U.S. does withstand the attack, and even though they lose some battles here in Washington, D.C., eventually we do win the war, okay, win. And I'll explain what I mean by win in a second, because not like we won the Revolutionary War. This is a little bit of a different type of victory. The last thing is our Star Spangled Banner, our national anthem, gets written by Francis Scott Key. This is just a kind of cool U.S. history fact as opposed to a important detail. But Francis Scott Key writes the Star Spangled Banner while watching at Fort McHenry. So if you look at the actual lyrics, all right, which I'm going to just kind of throw in the chat in a second. Give me 1 second. Yeah, all right. It wasn't really much of a win, but it definitely wasn't an American loss, and I'll talk about that for a second. So these are the national anthem. If you kind of see, if you really look at the lyrics, right? They're talking about a flag. Francis Scott Key, he's looking at a flag, and he's talking about how there were rockets, red glare, there was bombs bursting in air, but that flag is still sitting right there, sort of thing, right? So this was something that Francis Scott Key saw during the Battle of Fort McHenry. He literally is sitting on a hill writing the lyrics to what will become eventually our national anthem. So that's just kind of a cool story. So with that being said, we're just going to watch a quick 2.5 minute, what I call boringhistory.com video, but it's just good to give a quick summary, at least visually, of what happened. So I'm going to pull that up here. I'm going to mute myself so you can watch. It's just 3 minutes long. And then we got one final slide before we get to the assignment.
Just a few decades after winning independence, the United States went back to war with Britain in the War of 1812. At the center of the conflict was Britain's war with Napoleon's France. Obsessed with stopping Napoleon, the British blockaded the American coastline to halt cargo ships bound for France. This did not set well with the United States. The second thing that riled Americans was something called impressment.
Impressment was a semi-official form of kidnapping. British sailors would come on board American ships and seize off American sailors. They claimed that they had been British sailors. They were deserters from the British Navy. Sometimes they were, very often they weren't.
So on May 11, 1812, the U.S. declared war on Great Britain. Though the two sides fought several battles on U.S. soil, they were basically at a stalemate after 2 years. Then in 1814, the British defeated Napoleon and turned their full attention to the U.S. and immediately shipped reinforcements to America.
The reinforcements the British sent were probably the best soldiers in the world at the time. They had been campaigning against Napoleon on the European continent for years. They were battle-tested and very experienced.
In August 1814, they marched into Washington, D.C. and burned the Capitol and White House. President Madison fled to the countryside.
When the British attacked the east coast of the United States and invaded Washington, it was the most humiliating moment in American history. And one of the ironic things is that it took place at a moment when the causes of the war were largely dissipating. Well, with the end of the war against Napoleon, the British had no incentive to seize American ships anymore, and they pretty much lost their incentive to seize American sailors. So those two principal causes of the war simply vanished at that point.
It was clear neither side could gain a decisive advantage. So on December 24, 1814, Britain and the U.S. ended the war by signing the Treaty of Ghent in modern-day Belgium. But before news that the peace treaty had been signed crossed the Atlantic, Britain and the U.S. fought the war's biggest battle at New Orleans. General Andrew Jackson commanded a small army unit with some unlikely allies.
Jackson's army at New Orleans was the most motley crew perhaps in American military history. It consisted of pirates, of slaves, of former slaves, of Haitians, of Spanish, of just about anybody Jackson could talk or dragoon into service in New Orleans. And most of them didn't even want to fight, but they were more frightened of Jackson than they were of the British. So between the two, they figured they better fight.
This motley crew of 4,000 faced more than 10,000 British soldiers and saved New Orleans. Ironically, in the end, very little had changed because of the war. No new lands were gained or lost, though nearly 24,000 American and British soldiers died.
The War of 1812 is one of the strange ones that ends on basically, well, what they call the status quo ante bellum. They just said, let's forget we ever fought the war and go back to where we were before it started.
Emmanuel, just catch up with the notes that you missed. It's not a big deal. So yeah, the war was like not for nothing. We're going to now go through the effects, but it was essentially not a decisive victory. But it didn't need to be for the Americans to be happy with what happened. Yes, absolutely. We'll definitely look at Andrew Jackson's highlights. You guys just saw, as you copy this down, this is the last slide. Andrew Jackson is a controversial president, but he was a good military general for sure. What is ironic, though, in the War of 1812, they fight a battle called the Battle of New Orleans after the war was over. Understand, in 1814, 1815, news didn't travel fast enough to New Orleans to say that the war was over. So these people had a battle for no reason, essentially. But Andrew Jackson became like a national hero because he was able to win with a group that was heavily outmanned versus the British. So yeah, we'll definitely look at Andrew Jackson. He is one of the more controversial presidents, meaning he did some good things, he did some bad things, but the bad things he did have been looked at in a very negative light.
He did way too much bad things.
I wouldn't say way too many bad things, but definitely I don't want to get too far ahead, but specifically his treatment of Native Americans, the way he carried himself as president was very aggressive. Like, he was a lot different type of a president they had never seen at that point. Like, the first 6 presidents were nothing like him, so to speak. So he was a little bit of a different animal. But we'll talk about him a little bit later on. But he was a successful general during the War of 1812. All right, let's look at the effects of the War of 1812. Now, one of my least favorite things, I hate the name of the war, because the War of 1812 lasts 2 years. Okay, it takes place actually more in 1813 and 1814 than it does War of 1812. They can name it anything. They named it that, which I just kind of find stupid. Specifically because, like, you know, the French and Indian War also goes by the name of the 7 Years' War. But the thing lasted 9 years. Like, I don't know why they can't come up with some better names in history, but this is the War of 1812, even though it lasts beyond just 1 year. Because when I was in 8th grade, I used to think, oh yeah, it lasted 1 year. No, it lasted close to 2.5, actually. All right. So the Treaty of Ghent ended the War of 1812 in favor, kind of an American victory. Some will argue this wasn't an American victory. It was a tie, but it's certainly not an American loss. All right, that much we could definitely say. And part of the treaty said that Britain needs to leave Canada and leave the United States area alone, which they do. They leave parts of Canada. So they leave it away from the United States, so that is good. Britain also needs to stop providing weapons to the Native Americans. That's another part of the treaty that is really important. But then America needs to open back up its trade with Britain again. They need to get rid of the trade embargo, which they end up doing after the treaty again. So we now open up trade with Britain. That makes a lot of people in New England happy, but you know, the rest of the country, not so much. All right. The most important thing for the Regents, though, is probably the long-term causes. The first one is America maintained its independence as a new country. Remember, George Washington said to stay out of conflicts around the world. We tried to. This was one that kind of came in our front step because the British were, you know, sending weapons to the Native Americans. They were impressing our soldiers. George Washington probably would have been okay with this war because Britain was kind of messing with us, so to speak. It's not like we went actively looking for a war. All right. It also proves that we had kind of beaten Great Britain again. So this proves that we're continued a strong country. If we had lost this war, then we maybe don't maintain our independence, and maybe we're susceptible from being taken over by Britain again. But that does not happen. That is not the case. Hold on one second.
Ms. Soto and Ms. Roberson, please contact me in office. Soto and Ms. Roberson, contact me in office, please.
The last thing you're writing down, though not the last thing I'm mentioning, is this sets up what's called the era of good feelings. So we have time eras in our country, right? We have the Revolutionary War era, where we're getting ready to fight the Revolutionary War. We have the Civil War era. We have the Industrial era. Eras are a period of time where people have very similar thoughts or major events going on. So this is called the era of good feelings. This is a time where people felt very good about being in America, and they were very prideful because we had just won another war in their mind again against Great Britain. Our country's expanding, we're growing, so people were very unified and very prideful in this country. I would say it's kind of the opposite of what it is in 2020. I think we have maybe half the country very unified and prideful, and the other half maybe not so much. We're definitely not as unified as we were throughout American history, like during the era of good feelings. All right, and you can see that literally unfolding with the presidential election, because it is literally 50-50 or 51-49 one way. So it's like really, really close. All right, that is not how the era of good feelings was, where pretty much everyone was unified. Just some side notes. The Federalist Political Party, which was led by John Adams and Alexander Hamilton, seems to fall apart after this. They were very opposed to the War of 1812. After the War of 1812, people were very happy, so the Federalist Party were kind of looked at in a bad way for not supporting the war. Eventually, over the next couple of years, there'll be a new political party that forms called the Whigs. That is how you spell it, not like the hairpiece. The political party is spelled like this. So you'll see them come up a little bit later on in this class. All right, so I wanted to give you a heads up with that. And I mean, I could write number 4 for the next 3 units. Many Native Americans continue to have conflicts with Americans after this conflict. All right, things don't get better, they get worse. Many Native Americans realize this was a war that, since America kind of didn't lose, the Native Americans are going to have to understand that America is going to continue to grow, and that's going to lead to more conflicts with them. All right? Yeah. All right, let's try the 2 Regents questions, and then you have 15 total minutes to work on the web quest. This is not the easiest. Not the easiest question, at least the first one. So let's see how we do. Okay, I would say in the ranking of Regents questions that you've done so far, I'm thinking this one's one of the harder ones. So if you struggle with it, really not a big deal. All right, anyone else need more time to copy? I'll give you 10 seconds. Okay. So many New England citizens opposed the United States participation in the War of 1812 because they what? So this is a tough question. Oh, Ariel coming out quick. 3 is correct. Excellent. All right, resented disruption in their trade with England. Okay, New England was trading with Great Britain, and this war is going to stop that from happening. So obviously they were upset with that. That's a really tough question. Let me say this, ladies and gentlemen. If that question comes up on the Regents in June, you'll hear me slam the table because I'll be pissed that the test takers decided to choose that particular one. All right, but that is a good job. You guys were able to work it through. This one's a little bit more straightforward. This is maybe a question you'd see more on the War of 1812. One result of the War of 1812 was that the United States did what? That one's easier. Yes. 2 is correct. Maintained its independence and its territory. So that is the correct answer. All right. Take a look at your Google Doc, which is in your Google Classroom. I think it should be straightforward. I will just mention a couple of things. All right, I'm going to share that tab right now. First off, while I have you here, just so I remember, there are parent-teacher conferences, 4:30 to 7 p.m. tonight. If your parents want to stop in, just give them my Google Meet code. If I'm available, I will talk to them quickly and be straight with them. If they are not able to do it today, they could do it tomorrow, or they could always email me if they want. So that's tonight or tomorrow if anyone wants to stop in. All right. And we'll go through the impact of the War of 1812. So you go to this reading. All right. Looks like this. Okay. And it's going to tell you where to look. So it tells you to start. You can skip the first paragraph, to be honest, as an introduction. It tells you to look at the cause of the War of 1812. Okay. So you go there. You have 2 questions on it. Okay. Then it tells you the War of 1812 breaks out. Okay. And that's going to come here. All right, you got questions 3 and 4. So follow the headings to help you get the correct answer. All right. I don't know why it looks like that, guys. They didn't have Instagram, face filters back then. They had paintings. So you know what? It's gonna happen like that sometimes. You guys got all these filters and stuff. You can make yourself look any way you particularly want, but like our founding fathers and our historical people don't do. So that's how it is. All right, I'm going to mute myself, take attendance. I'm going to try and get an election update, and I'll try and update you by the end. Yes, George Washington had teeth problems. Yes, that is correct. But that wasn't George Washington in the photo. So